I'm Ray Borane, and I'm the former mayor of Douglas, Arizona, which is a border community in the southeastern part of the state. I was the mayor of the community for 12 years.
So how do you feel that the border rhetoric surrounding violence in your community actually relates to the crime that you saw there, or the lack thereof?
Well, you have to be very, very specific in making a statement about border crime in border communities and violence which is associated with border communities. The difference being that the city within itself would measure their own crime rate and the crimes that are inherent to that community, and then there would be the crimes that many people would like to associate with border violence and border crime, which really has nothing to do with the combination of both. The border crime is somewhat associated with the violence on the border in a border community is really, to a certain extent, a fallacy, because the reality is that for the most part, people that are crossing the border in border communities, such as mine, are in transit. There really is not much of what you might call a delay in the movement. It's a rapid movement. It's trying to get from point A to point B for a pickup or whatever the case might be, and there really is not much time in that interim for any violence what would be directly associated with the border. Now, having said that, there are exceptions, and that's if the intervention by law enforcement, such as the Border Patrol, occurs, then you could associate that type of trafficking with violence on the border because of the interdiction of the Border Patrol and other law enforcement, federal law enforcement, especially agencies, which do become involved with them, and then there could be an exchange there of some type of activity which could be considered violence. But the violence in the community per se is not one that where the crime rate really is not affected by the border in the local community.
And so, over the last decade, or last 2 or 3 years, how has the buildup of a military presence and an increase in Border Patrol, how has that affected crime in Douglas?
Well, the thing again that needs to be understood is that the intent has always been, and I think that all the publicity and the propaganda about the military on the border has to be understood that the border itself is actually manned by the Border Patrol. That is the first line of defense, so to speak. The military, the National Guard, or whatever other military forces are there, are always secondary, and they haven't been, as I said, as a former mayor and having experienced much of this, they haven't really ever been primary, so to speak. I don't think that there's ever been an incident where there has been any direct violence between any military unit or any branch of any military unit with any type of illegal crossing of either drugs or human smuggling. Now, there may be a rare case that maybe there might have been a confrontation or two, but for the most part, the interdiction, the facing off, and the defense is primarily the responsibility of the Border Patrol.
And does that happen very often, or is that a rare occasion where you actually see?
Well, I would say in my experience, and as I say as former mayor, and the 12 years that I was there, and I'm still very active because I'm active on both sides of the border, I could tell you that the occasions that there are any confrontations between any branch of the military are very, very seldom and very rare.
And speaking to that, instances of the rarity of those confrontations, would you say that's a general indication that the crime, as it relates to narcotraficantes or drug dealers coming across the border, what is that makeup of that?
The interesting thing about that is that most of the activity of the narcotraficantes on the Mexican side of the border, of course that's where they are, is generally turf battle and the trying to being able to control the corridors. And you see a lot of that, even in the smaller communities, in the smaller Mexican communities. If, let's say, somebody who has had control of the border or that area, for whatever the reason is, whether he moves out bigger and better things, or is assassinated, or whatever the case might be, the only time you really see any movement on the Mexican side of the border, or you see any violence, is when the battle begins to get control of that activity in that community, because you have to understand that when you get to the border, that is the last staging area for them to get it across the border. So you're talking about controlling of people, warehousing, the transportation, and everything that is affiliated or associated directly or indirectly.
And how much of that ever actually spills over to the U.S. side?
Hardly ever. You don't hardly ever see that. Once in a while, you will hear that somebody may be on the other side of the border, the American side of the border, who may have been connected with the people on the other side, may have been a contact on this side of the border, may go into Mexico, and of course then the retaliation would take place there. Or it's not unusual that maybe they could come on this side of the border and do whatever they felt they had to do to ensure that they were going to be in control. But that is very, very rare.
And speaking of that, what would you say to somebody like Paul Bobo, who, sheriff of Pinal County, who says that there's gunfights going on daily in his area? Is that something that you've ever seen, or? Well,
I'm always intrigued by what happens in Pinal County and the individual that you just mentioned, because I can't understand how somebody who's so far removed from the border and someone who is so detached, and the activity is so detached. When those people are that far into the country, they're moving. And generally, they don't have any resistance at all. The main line of resistance is at the border, and let's say within a certain area of maybe 10 to 15 miles beyond the border, with the checkpoints and whatever the recourses or resources are for the government to try to have that interdiction. But I'm intrigued, as I mentioned earlier, by the fact that the sheriff of Pinal County is so involved in this type of activity, when they're sprinting along, they're moving along, and I can't see how there could be such a high concentration that far from the border. That's my opinion on that particular aspect of it, as it relates to Pinal County.